I think this is my third one of these industry forums I've been a part of, so happy to be here again. I think we have some interesting stuff to talk about when it comes to global supply chains around food, geopolitics, and inflation. We're at a pretty interesting nexus point of our market. So for people who don't know, Bunge, we focus on global food trade. So when I say that, it's really the raw material inputs for food, so corn, wheat, soybeans, vegetable oils, anything that's really a food staple. So we feed animals that become, pork or chicken. We also, use veg oil to fry French fries or fry, chips, bakery items, cookies. Confectionery, I always say like the really good part of those Lindt chocolates, the interior, the creamy part, that's stuff that we help to produce. So that's Bunge's business. We operate globally, almost every country that's a major food producer in the world. We're about a third asset footprint between Europe, North America, South America, then with a little bit in Asia and China. So I'm going to focus today about kind of the global grain trade, what's happened, and kind of what we look out for. But I'm also going to take a step back first to kind of give people a more base understanding of what we talk about when we talk about with world food production and world food trade. So these are some charts we get from Our World in Data, which really pulls from the UN and other large statistical organizations. But just to level set, total Earth surface, about 29% of that is land, 149 million square kilometers. If you look at agriculture, or habitable land, 71% of that. Agriculture, about 51 million square kilometers, so we're about, 1/3 of total land area. And if you look at agricultural land, 23% of that is focused on crops. That's Bunge's business right there. So if you look at where our global caloric supply comes from, if you look at that, livestock, huge part of it, plant-based food, a little bit less. And then if you break it down, protein, global protein supply, 63% from plant-based, 37% from meat and dairy. But Bunge really lives in these green areas, so that's what we're going to focus on today. Talking about that world food supply, so there's probably a lot of focused headlines lately. ESG, sustainability, carbon, regenerative agriculture. Maybe people have heard about this, but one of the things that we come back to is climate change is a big focus of our industry, and people point to farming as a way that we could help to sequester carbon or do better practices. So one thing I wanted to start off from the front was that this is, on the left here, the land used for cereal, so that's grains production, since 1960. We're up maybe 10%. This is food production since the same time, 1960, up about 250%. So for us, when we talk about agriculture and sustainable agriculture, this is really important to us. We're using basically the same amount of land, and we're producing a whole lot more. And you can see that our food production is outpacing population growth in the world. So when we look at this, we say this is a pretty sustainable business that we're in. Another chart, they say, how do you look at that yield gain in terms of land spared? So right now, using this 500 million hectares for cereal production, if you wouldn't have had the yield gains we had in the last 50, 60 years, you probably would have been about 2 billion acres of land used, hectares of land used. So we think we've spared around 1.5 billion, call it 3 times the amount of production or possible productionable land use. Arable land. This is going to help us drive into why world trade for food becomes important. Arable land is not distributed equally across the globe. This chart is arable land, agricultural land per capita. So how many acres of food productible land is there per person in different regions? If you look at North and South America, we're pretty blessed. We have about 1.5 hectares per person of arable land. If you look at Southeast Asia, about 1/4 hectare per person of arable land. This is important because this shows or dictates how food flows across the world. One big thing about this denominator, right, is a lot of population lives over here. People who have been to the Western United States realize that we don't have a lot of population that goes, west of the Mississippi. So we're a big area with a relatively small population. So why this, again, becomes important, if you look at share of population that cannot afford a healthy diet, it's very concentrated in areas with low arable land use per person, right? What this means to us, those are places that import food. Where we are, we export food. Canada, export food. Russia, Black Sea, Europe, exports food. Brazil is a little bit of a misnomer. They're a huge arable land. You could argue for some good or bad reasons when it comes to the Amazon rainforest, just a little bit of a poorer population in total. But generally, less arable land you have, the higher chances you can't afford a healthy diet. So, unsurprisingly, as your per capita income increases, the ability to afford a healthy diet also increases. This is GDP per capita compared to daily caloric supply. Here's the United States up in the very right-hand corner of this. We have a lot of calories available to the average person. We have a lot of high income. A lot of African countries here in purple in the bottom left, as you would kind of expect from that last chart. China, somewhere in the middle. Indonesia, somewhere in the middle. Russia, again, towards the upper right. And then sort of just the inverse chart. As you have more calories available, undernourishment drops. So we, again, think this is a very important thing of how you feed the world, solve world hunger. You have to supply the calories, you have to get them cheaply. Another similar chart, how does the cost of a healthy diet compare to median incomes? When you look at it globally, that's this cost of a healthy diet line, this kind of purplish line. It doesn't actually change much across the world. So it's not that food is way more expensive in some regions relative to other regions, and this is all adjusted per income. It's just that some regions earn a whole lot more relative to that base. So this is important because if you look at some of these countries, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, when food prices rise, and all of a sudden, big part of your country, your below median line, can't afford a healthy diet, that's where some instability happens, right? This is where people say the Arab Spring of, what was that, 2013, 14, where wheat prices go crazy, politically unstable and poor areas have more potential for bad outcomes, civil wars, political unrest. Again, similar thing, won't spend too much time, but just expenditure on food. If you look at average expenditure on food, or let's see what this one is, share of consumer expenditure, this is pretty important. The United States, we spend about 6% of our income on food. Again, very blessed, not something we probably think about a lot. Bunge, when we ship food around the world, it's something we think about quite a lot. So fruit importers, India, right? They spend 30% of their income on food. Pakistan, 40%. Kenya, Nigeria, over half of their income goes to food. This all ties into world trade. I'm just trying to lay this groundwork first. Again, price gains, productivity. We're growing our wages a whole lot faster than we're growing our food prices. I bring this up because, again, food inflation has been something that's been in the news quite a bit. We do agree that it's important, but we wanted to level set that it's important from a much lower base than it has been in the past. How much food, I just love these kind of charts, how much food can you buy for one working hour in the manufacturing sector? So back in 1900, you work 1 hour, you could afford 2 eggs. Today, you work 1 hour, you can afford 12 eggs. So, and this is a little bit outdated, but generally these are the trends we like to see. So, why is this important? Food trade. Every country produces slightly different food. Big, huge mix of different types of calories, protein, fat, carbohydrates from different sources we think is important to a healthy diet. So if you look at this, this is the top exporters of food in the world on the left, top importers of food in the world on the right. And this is by share of trade, and you can see total trade about $620 billion. So interestingly enough, for the US, one of the largest arable land per person countries in the world, we are both the largest exporter of food in the world, we are also the largest importer of food in the world. So you could say, why is that? We produce our own food. We have different tastes, right? So we want to import different fish, we want to import different productions of food. We can get into other categories why, but this shows preference, right? Or if somebody can do something a little bit cheaper than we can, we export maybe soybeans, we import shrimp, for instance. Other big exporters, China, big exporter. China also big importer. This stuff starts to balance out a little bit, again, showing the benefits of world trade. This is the US specifically. This is China specifically. So seeing what China exports, mollusks, so that's shrimp, shellfish, prepared, more fish, animal feed, fowl, duck, goose. I think somebody pointed out to me, communion wafers is on here, so they're the largest producer of communion wafers in the world. Some fruit, more shrimp, dog and cat food. This is China's food export. You'd say it's a little bit probably more on the value-added side. They send processed food to the rest of the world. Now, looking at Brazil, let's see if I can, Brazil, one of the other largest food exporters in the world, raw materials. They send out raw sugarcane and soybeans. So this is food, raw food stuff that Bunge touches, one of the largest exporters of raw food stuff in the world. But again, if you looked at their import, they import more finished food products. So going through this, why does this matter? Many countries, even if they are land rich or arable land rich, they're still a big import of world trade. So for countries that already spend most of their disposable income on food, this can become destabilizing if there is a hiccup in world trade, right? If you are reliant on the world market to provide you cheap calories and something happens, that's where that food instability can become worrying. So this is a chart, I believe this is from the FAO, food inflation this past year, based on a year earlier. So US, we've definitely seen it, but so has the rest of the world, South America, Africa in particular, the Middle East in particular. We can talk about the reason why. And this is the difference between food inflation and general inflation. So if food inflation is outpacing the rest of prices, Asia is becoming a particularly worrying sign. The world in general is high, call it 6% more than average inflation, but here we are, America, Europe, a little bit less because again, we're a little bit richer in those ag resources. Just another comment on world trade, again, why this is important. This is the difference between the cost of shipping soybeans from Brazil, interior Brazil, I believe to China, and Minneapolis or Iowa to China. This is important because as world trade gets more efficient, it drives that different cost almost to zero, right? So the cost of a soybean in interior Brazil, the cost of a soybean in interior Iowa to a world market is roughly the same. So there's not as much benefit picking one region over another. And then I actually really just threw this in because this was a Boeing Center event and for supply chain. I think this is interesting. This blue chart shows how much value of corn or soybeans the farmer get relative to transportation costs. So depending on where you are, farmers receive about 60 to 80% of the delivered cost of their commodity to foreign markets, which again, we think is a pretty efficient model that we have and definitely good for farmers in our region. So back to the world trade, why it's important, tying it into today's issues. Ukraine and Russia. I assume everybody is pretty up to speed what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Why does this matter for food? If you look at global food exports, combined, 64% of sunflower oil is exported from Ukraine and Russia. 23% of world wheat exports are exported from Ukraine and Russia. Barley, maize, pretty big impacts. It causes supply shocks, of course. It causes price shocks, of course. The thing that we debate a lot is how quickly can trade solve this versus how quickly can government solve this. So as we look at what the market has done, these graphs, they might be a little bit hard to read, but this top one up here is probably the most important. This is Russia and Ukraine cumulative monthly exports in the last few years. So what you're looking at is how exports grow over time. Black is this year. We're behind, right? We're behind by 40% or so. Ukraine and Russia are supplying roughly 40% less wheat to the world than they were before this happened. What does that mean for prices? These are world prices of sunflower oil and wheat indexed to basically the start of 22, so right before the war started, and where they are now. So at one point, wheat got to about double the price that it was before the war. Today, it's about 17% higher. At one point, sunflower oil got about 80% higher than before the war. Right now, it's actually about 3 or 4% under that price. When, again, we look at this from geopolitics, world trade perspective, like that to be lower, for sure. Happy it's not here. This is what the market does. So when the market says, boy, we have a problem, wheat prices double, right? What companies like Bunge do, some of our competitors, is we say, where's the rest of the wheat in the world? Australia, France, Canada. Who needs it? And we ship it there. The market gives us the profitable signal to say, hey, somebody come make money, come do this. This is what should be happening in the market. We think we fill that role to help tame food prices. So was this bad? Absolutely. It took us how long? 6 months to effectively solve most of the major food export problem out of Ukraine and Russia. So takes us to the question of 6 months, not ideal. There are countries that can't afford 6 months, right? Are there ways we can make the food supply chain more resilient to shocks like this? So one way, like I said at the beginning, produce more food from the same land. This is a chart I got from a very good book I read a couple years ago called More from Less. And it basically shows the same sort of chart. This is our total crop tonnage in the US that we're producing relative to the amount of fertilizer we're using, relative to the amount of water we're using, relative to the amount of acre we're using. And this is the chart we want to continue to see. How we do this, I think I have a slide on this a little bit later. It becomes an interesting debate, especially as we go through things like organic, sustainable, regenerative ag. I think I have a study later, but there's some argument to be made that this yield gain would start to go off. This yield gain, in a lot of our opinion, is science-based, right? It's seed traits, it's tractor technology, it's planting technology, it's, to use the bad word, it's industrialized farming, right? It is extremely, extremely efficient. Yeah, so like I said, we'll have that on the next slide. So this is a study, National Library of Medicine, meta-analysis of genetically modified crops. So impacts of GM crop adoption, about a 20% gain in yield, 37% decrease in pesticide use, 39% decrease in pesticide cost, farmer profit goes up quite a bit. Some people look at this chart and say, farmer profit's a bad thing, that they shouldn't be making money, they should be investing in cover crops, they should be investing in organic things, what have you. We look at this and say, this is a good thing. We want our farmers to have incentive to continue to plant and produce food so that we have stock, so that prices are lower, so that food can move across the globe in an efficient way. So we use palm oil as an example when we talk about the sustainability aspect and regenerative ag aspect of food trade. So I've probably spent a little bit too much time talking about food trade relative to the US and how we view it from here. We are a land-rich country. We are an income-rich country. Food is cheap to us. A lot of the world does not have the same benefit that we do. So anyone have palm oil in their shelf stock at home? Probably not. I'd expect not. Palm oil, probably the cheapest vegetable oil source of fat you could have in the world today. Grown primarily in Indonesia and Malaysia, grown by farmers that we consider to be smallholder farmers. I think we consider that to any farmer that has, less than 10 acres of production that they control. Anyone know what the average farm size in the US is? I think it's like 600, 800 acres right now. Brazil is about 2,000 acres right now. So these are small farmers in Malaysia and Indonesia. They live on way less money than we would think somebody should live on today. And where do they send their production? So this is what we call grids in Bunge parlance, but this is by year where palm oil is shipped to. So Europe takes about 6 million tons of palm oil. So Europe still decent sized palm oil user, things like croissants, chocolates, stuff like that. So Northeast Asia, a little bit bigger, 8 million tons, call it. Southeast Asia, another 4 million tons. South Asia, 15 million tons. Middle East, 2 million tons. North Africa, 1.5 million. Sub-Saharan Africa, 4.6 million tons. But when you add that all up, 75% of palm oil is traded amongst low or medium income countries, basically something like Indonesia to India, Malaysia to China. Most of these consumers have way different priorities than we do, right? We go. I could scroll all the way back. That's where they're spending, I think we said in India, 30% of their income on food. They want palm oil because palm oil is the cheapest source of fat that they can get. They still buy others, but this fills a pretty big part of their daily diet. So when we think of sustainability, regen ag, organic production from a Western world perspective, we spend 6% of our income on food. If food costs a little bit more, and we spend 7% of our income on food or 8% income on our food, I mean, you guys already see the headlines, right? Food inflation is crazy already. So we get mad at small increases, but we can stomach it. Somebody who spends 30% of their income on food, when you start saying, you know what we should do? We should ban palm oil because palm oil is bad. That is a whole bigger impact on a lot part of the world that we don't necessarily look at all the time. So again, I bring this up because from Bunge's standpoint, when we look at this, we think one of our main missions is driving low cost, cheaper food, more efficient food to parts of the world that wouldn't otherwise have access to it. Another way we could make our supply chain more resilient is to increase our competition in shipping costs. This is probably more of a US phenomenon than other parts of the world. These are rail tariff rates over time. So maybe people don't know our rail system too well. Our rail is effectively regionalized monopolies across this country that's kind of bisected by the Mississippi River. Because it's a monopoly, it's very heavily infrastructure focused. There's very heavily government regulated, I should say. Rails have the ability to increase their rates pretty standardly over time. When we as Bunge are trying to move soybeans from Iowa to the PNW to put it on a boat to ship to China, you only really have one option. That option knows they have pricing power. They increase that pricing power over time. We don't view that as something that's very efficient. We don't view that as something that is necessarily good for the farmer or the world consumer at the end of the day. But it's kind of a reality we deal with. And the other reason I bring this up today is you guys probably saw in the news in the last few weeks the potential rail strike that's coming. It was averted about a month ago. It could be coming back in a few weeks. Rail, they have pricing power over us. They have pricing power over the workers that work on the rail systems. It's a little bit of a problem. It's probably a weak point we see in our supply chain today. Another part of how we increase resiliency in our food supply chain, we subsidize our farmers a lot. Everyone does. It's something we probably don't talk about in our political discourse too much, but this is a chart of direct government payments to farmers as a percent of their net income. So right now, farmers make roughly 15% of their net income as a direct payment from the government, either in the form of, we'll pay you not to plant that land, we'll help you pay for your crop insurance. Some of it's just checks in the mail. In theory, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, puts caps on this limit. We were butting as the country right up to about $30 billion that we subsidize our farmers every year. The reason we do this, generally food security, right? You keep your farmers profitable, you keep them employed. Not many people want to move to the middle of Iowa and work on a farm, right? So you got to give people incentives to continue to do this. This is one way we do it. Another way we do it, this is not direct government payments. Right now, this is, again, same sort of grid. This is our corn, U.S. corn supply and use for the last 10 years. Right now, we burn about 5 billion bushels of corn per year out of production of about 14 billion bushels. So we burn roughly 1/3 of our corn supply every year. We export about 2 billion. So we push a lot of corn out of our supply base, right? So we way overproduce relative to what we use in the U.S. Could argue if that's good or not. One reason is you continue to incentivize the production of food within the country. Veg oils, we are now burning around 45% of our total vegetable oil supply in the U.S. This goes into things like renewable diesel. Renewable diesel has probably a better story than corn in that it actually reduces carbon usage. So it is a chemical replacement for diesel use. So companies like Chevron, Phillips 66, we actually have a partnership with Chevron to produce this stuff, lowers greenhouse gas by about 50%. So we think this one probably has a little bit better of an economic argument, but again, we are overproducing versus what we need. Another, well, I guess I can probably skip over this. Another big change, this is California's carbon reduction targets going forward. California is this orange line. So they're trying to reduce by, call it 20% by 2030. So they're the big driver of why this is starting to happen. And this is our, let's see, renewable diesel. It's kind of not a great chart, but this is the 50%. That's where we are versus gasoline. I'll skip over a couple of these because I think I'm running out of time. So another point when we talk about inflation, so the carbon sustainability, regen ag, definitely in the news a lot. One reason why we can be a little bit skeptical of it at times, this is a great chart from a guy named Vaclav Smil. He's a professor up in Winnipeg, but it basically shows the land area needed versus the power density of different fuel types. So when we think of oil, extremely land intensive to a degree, extremely power dense. That's why we use oil, right? That's why you put it in your car, because you can get 400 miles per tank or whatever it is. Look at hydro. The area still quite a bit bigger. Power density, not quite as good. Water doesn't hold as much power. Gravity doesn't have as much power as oil does. Where's nuclear on here? I think it should be, or maybe it's not. Here's solar panels, low area used, low power density. Phytomass is what we talk about when we talk about renewable diesel, ethanol, when you grow something out of the ground, turn it into fuel. Big area usage, low power density. Why that matters to inflation? When you move down the power density charts, things cost more, right? You need more of a thing, physical volume, so tank space, to hold that to get the same energy generating capacity out of it. Let's see. I'll skip over a couple of these. So general question, again, tying back to inflation, does these energy policies, do us burning part of our food supply cause food inflation, right? That's an argument that you hear a lot. Here is the chart of bean oil, soybean oil, in the last few years. Renewable diesel started about here. Prices are now about here. So you can say that they've about doubled in a 2-year span. Does this cause inflation? Here's the long term. So 1850 to today, this is corn and wheat. I don't have bean oil on it, so it's not the greatest analogy versus petroleum, but the corn we burn is for ethanol, which goes into gasoline, which has, you know, a replacement effect from petroleum. So corn, wheat, quite a bit lower, petroleum, quite a bit higher. We do not think in the long term this causes meaningful food inflation, but it is definitely an argument to be had. And what that inflation trade-off is relative to having stocks of food in the country is kind of the debate. So in summary, a large portion of global food is traded amongst country, high arable land areas to low arable land areas. The price of this food is usually dictated by the market, but with a lack of government intervention and some non-market-based transportation, with a lot of government intervention and some non-market-based transportation costs. So that's the rail, that's the government payments. Macro events can shock these prices higher, causing immense strain on low-income countries. That's what we've seen in the Middle East and North Africa so far this year. One way we continue to lower food costs is through technology, getting more food from the same land. I think that's one of the most important takeaways we can have out of this. And a big open question we have is, do sustainability and ESG goals fundamentally make food more expensive? So that's moving down that power density chart. That's also lowering the yield, giving up some of that technological gains in favor of other attributes. So it's an open question. A lot of the world is debating it right now, and we are part of that conversation.